operations that were taking place at the turn of the century down in San Bernardino and other places. But he's very, very interested in the whole story of the arrows, right? The Snorre Aeroclid Nimza. And he actually, I think he's got the best shot at translating Nimza. That he actually translated it from German. And and I think he's got the best shot at what it might actually be. And you'll have to buy his book to find that out.
Okay.
But what I will tell you is have him on. He'll tell you all about it. He loves talking about it. What I will say, though, is that when there's this guy, Delschau, and Delschau he had come in via Nimza into the Snorre Aeroclub, and there's a consensus of opinion among some circles that he was a plant for Nimza. Other people don't think that, but but what he did do is he worked on them, and in his later life, he made a series of collages, like art collages, of these airships, and they were fairly detailed schematics of how the airships were designed and what their propulsion systems were and how they were controlled, where the gas tanks were, and all this other stuff, right? Well, hidden in one of those drawings, and there's a whole story about Delschau and his collages. They were thrown in a dumpster. This guy fished them out of a dumpster, and it's a very convoluted, interesting story. But buried in one of these collages is a schematic of an airship, and its power source looks exactly like the Bell.
Wow!
And it even has arrows, right, denoting rotation, and the arrows seem to indicate that it was creating some sort of a torsion field, which is a commonly held belief that the Bell is a torsion engine, and it creates a torsion force, and then it becomes anti-gravity. And I can't get into physics; it's over my head. But there are better guys to do that. But he found a picture of it in an arrow from 1897. And so the theory is that the Nimza had given them a bell, or a series of bells that they could use to power their airships. And Nimza had eventually incorporated that technology into the Third Reich. And then that's where you get the stories of the Bell and Hans Kammler and all the rest of it.
So do you think,
so it's very old.
Yeah, do you think like the Bell and all that stuff, and you go to Antarctica, right after the war, the talk of like the secret underground bases, German bases or whatever, and some talk that the Bell was actually, continued on there. Do you know much about that at all, or do you believe that theory?
I do believe that theory. I talked to a guy named Dr. Richard Allen Miller. He said that he had been there, and he described the interior of the facility. But I do believe it. One of the key things for me is that Kammler, who was running the project, and he, at that point in the war, Kammler had actually unseated Albert Speer as the head of the special projects for the SS and for the Third Reich, basically. And he died like 6 times. Nobody knows where he went. He just vanished off the face of the earth. Nobody found a body. He died 6 completely different ways. He died in a car accident. He was hit by a car. He died from a grenade explosion. He was shot. I mean, there's all these different ways that he died. But the story that Sporenberg told Polish intelligence to try to save himself after the war, this guy Jacob Sporenberg, that Igor Witowski had picked up and has now proliferated, was that Kammler had left, that he had taken the scientists and the Bell prototypes with him, and then some of the stories seem to indicate that he had shot the technicians and the slave labor that he had used on the project, and they loaded them into a Junkers 390, which is a very large transport. There was actually also a bomber. He had allocated himself, I think, 4 of the surviving 6 that existed at that time. He had taken 4 of them and just vanished. And the range of the Junkers 390 would have gotten them, if you're going to fly to Antarctica, the range of that thing would have gone from where they were in the Harz Mountains to somewhere in Africa, Northish Africa, North Central Africa, somewhere around there, is where they would have run out of fuel. It's not beyond the pale that they either could have landed and refueled, and if they had refueled at that point, they would have made it on fumes to Antarctica. But additionally, the Junkers 290, which was a slightly smaller version, there was a supposedly, I've never found any documentation, but there are stories that the Junkers 290 was actually field tested to midair refuel a 390. And what had happened was is that they were taking the 390 and flying it toward New York to do a test run to see if they could make it to drop an atomic bomb on New York.
Wow.
And as part of that, well, they were very sophisticated. As part of that, they sent up a 290, and the entire cargo hold they had filled with bladders of fuel. And they actually ran a hose out. They lowered the tailgate, so to speak, and they ran a hose. They threw a hose out the back, and somebody in the 390 grabbed the hose and plugged it in, and they refueled the aircraft in midair in like 1944. So, if they midair refueled it, then who knows? They could have easily made it. Also, you see a large number of cargo U-boats, and I know everybody's thinking. So normally when you think of a U-boat, right, you think of just a classic submarine, fires torpedoes, they were shooting, transports and cargo ships and other stuff, the whole, wolf pack thing, and that's true. But the Germans had also built a class of U-boat that originally was intended to be a mine layer. And so these U-boats had large cavernous interiors that were designed to hold mines. Well, as things got worse and worse, they decided that mine laying wasn't really in their future. So they modified these U-boats to actually carry cargo. And the idea was that they could carry cargo under the ocean. They could take them to weird places and drop them off. Well, I think it's the U-235 was captured off the east coast of the United States. It was a cargo U-boat. It was filled with lead-lined cylinders, gold, and a complete Messerschmitt 262, which was the kind of German fighter plane at the time. It was the first jet aircraft. And they had it, and they had a couple of Japanese officers. I believe there was like an admiral, a couple captains, and then a bunch of German scientists, Japanese scientists, and other people. They captured this thing off the East Coast. Not to mention a number of U-boats that they captured or surrendered after the war. Hunting around down there in the South Atlantic and South Pacific. So there was quite a bit of submarine activity down there.
Oh,
and then you have the whole.
Well, I was going to say, towards the end of the war, too, the Germans really developed some really sophisticated submarines that, basically, a lot of people don't realize the basic Hunter submarine that, they used for sinking ships had a very short range. Towards the end of the war, they had ones that would go from basically Germany to South America capability. Right. I mean, and they were quite a bit larger and a lot more sophisticated.
Yeah, they had a significantly better snorkeling system, because one of the things that they had to do, because they ran diesel engines, is that the diesel exhaust, when they ran the engines, they trapped it, and then they had to vent it. So they had a whole snorkeling system where they basically put a pipe up, and they would expel the leftover, they would expel the output from the diesel engines. They did all kinds of stuff. I mean, they were getting very, very sophisticated toward the end, and you can't forget. I think it was Dönitz, the Admiral Dönitz. I think it was Dönitz. He said that they were going down there to build some sort of a Shangri-La thing, and for the German hierarchy down in Antarctica, and the whole Admiral Byrd thing where he goes down there to field test a bunch of military hardware. He takes enough troops to invade the entire, quote-unquote continent of Antarctica, and he's going to be down there for months and months and months. He's, months and months and months and months. And he's down there for like 3 weeks and basically was like, okay, I've had enough and left. So...
Yeah, but didn't...
there's a lot of...
But didn't, too, when he was down there, they lost a ship, if I remember right. They lost some troops, and they lost a couple planes.
Yep.
And,
yeah.
And they also, he wrote...
Tanks.
he wrote some stuff before he died, basically saying,
he did.
Yeah, saying some weird stuff that was going on there.
Right.
That they kind of went into an area, supposedly, that went from being freezing to normal type temperatures where there was a city,
right?
All that stuff. So it makes you wonder.
And I've never actually found a copy of it, but supposedly he did an interview with, I believe it was an Argentinian reporter, where he basically said that we went down there to fight them and we lost.
Well,
and, I mean, there's just tons and tons. You know what it is that there's a lot of debate about the whole Antarctic survival myth. That's what they call it. And it's a myth. There's very little to substantiate it. What you have is a lot of weird activity. And the weird activity circumstantially makes you think, okay, they were doing something down there. The problem is that there's nothing concrete. Like, I can tell you who Hans Kammler is. I can tell you where he was educated. I can tell you what his specialty was, all that stuff, right? But when it comes to 211, everybody thought it was fairly insane until they found the one in the Arctic, that they had some sort of a secret base in the Arctic, and they were monitoring radio traffic and doing weather forecasting and all this other stuff. And everybody thought it was bonkers until they found it.
Oh, yeah.
But there not being anything there. And conspiracies, I'll tell you, it's all about the circumstantial evidence. It really is. Because you can never find the smoking gun. It just does not exist.
Well,
and you'll never find it 100%. You look at the edge. You look at the edge of it, and there's a lot of weird stuff down there. Areas that we just won't go to. I mean, it's weird.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, though, why won't we go there?
Yeah.
And, again here, even recently, I guess there was something, it happened maybe a year or two ago in Antarctica, again.
Right.
Some scientists, said something that basically they didn't say too much other than something strange was going on. I had a person that wants to be a guest on my show, and I don't want to mention his name to book him in, but he actually says, yes, that there is still underground base there with, whatever, Germans are left from, new generations, but they're...
that I disagree with.
Yeah, and I do too, but he said also it's with aliens, and basically it's alien...
That's common.
Yeah, so I don't know, I'm going to bring him on and find out what his theory is.
I would, because even if you don't agree with everything that I say, there are nuggets in there that, with any person who's done legitimate research, there are nuggets in there where you're going to go, well, that's interesting, and then you, as the listener, are going to go, well, I'm curious about that. Who is this guy Kammler? And then you're going to do searches, and then you're going to find your own truth. So, for my money, I think that whoever was left after the fight, because from what Richard Allen Miller says, it's wasted. It's really shot up and blown up, and whoever was left, I think they skipped town. And, I have my own theory about where they went, but it ain't here.
You want to share it a little bit, or
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I, for a lot of reasons, I believe that if, and remember, I'm a rationalist, right? So I'm going to tell you, if that place existed, if they did survive, if they did have the bell, and things like Hounick, the other, UFOs that they supposedly have, if that's all true, I think that they probably would have gone to Venus. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that during the 50s, that there's a large number of contactees that describe interactions with Venusians, and the UFOs that they flew in were of a design that looks like a Haunebu. It has the same kind of characteristics. And they call them Nordics. They're tall. They're blonde. And one of the other things that's really interesting is that if you look at contactee stuff from the 50s, you see, like, one of the most famous Venusians that came here was a guy named Valiant Thor. and it very clearly defined as being Venusian.